Yeah. I mean, you're quickly hitting on probably the biggest thing in sustainability for not just Robinson, for most companies, is how to tackle the scope 3 emissions. So you can't come in and just say like, now you all must do this. It really is
Right.
about partnership, collaboration, and then being able to think about like where is there alignment and shared value on what we're trying to do here.
Well, welcome, Rachel. We are so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here.
So, one of the things we like to start with is so our listeners can learn a little bit more about you. So, could you share about yourself, both personally and professionally?
Absolutely. Do you feel like this is usually the hardest question? It should be the easiest and ends up, but yeah, absolutely. So, my current role is leading ESG at CH Robinson. So, ESG, environmental, social governance. And I also have the honor of serving as the president of the CH Robinson Foundation.
So cool.
Yeah, yeah. I've been with Robinson for almost 13 years now, and I'm in kind of a variety of roles that are tangential to that corporate responsibility, sustainability space, kind of whatever it was being called at the time. And I would say 21-year-old Rachel never would have thought she was going to be in business, especially not at a large corporation. I came out of college, very idealistic, ready to change the world. And for some reason at that time, that did not equate to business for me. So I jumped right into a career in nonprofit and worked with an education and international development nonprofit. But in both of those organizations, we worked really closely with corporates. And so from early on, I got the opportunity to kind of have a front seat to seeing how you can really use business as a force for good. So when an opportunity came up at Robinson to join the team, I jumped on it right away. And I kind of laugh about, sold my soul and went corporate 13 years ago. But it really is the truth is that it is an incredible way to be able to make impact in a different way. So outside of work, I'm a Minnesotan, kind of the typical Minnesotan is I grew up in Minnesota. I went to school here and I live in Minneapolis now in South Minneapolis. And if I'm not working, I'm usually at restaurants. I'm not a cook, so I'm eating out or I'm outside being active and hanging out with my old surly dog.
Okay, so I'm a foodie. So what is your favorite restaurant in the Twin Cities?
Well, okay, I don't know about favorite. There's some that I really miss from that last loft that we lost during COVID, but I'm
Mm,
in kind of the South Minneapolis area, so I end up at like Martina
Oh, I
and
love
St.
Martina.
yeah.
Genevieve and those
Yeah.
areas quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
But
not
we could
far
talk
from
about that
you.
forever.
I know,
Okay.
yeah. I'm like, yeah, I love Martina. Katie knows I'm always like
Hmm.
looking for new places. I love St. Genevieve. Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
you been to Gia? Are you near there?
I've been to Gia.
Okay. That's always a cute
I
one.
think I have a whole list in my phone. So anyway,
Let's
we're way off
talk about
topic.
this later. Yeah, sorry, but I am also for new ones because I love it. And then when I'm coming down to making the decision, I end up like falling back on the same ones over and over. So we can talk about that later.
So Rachel, so you kind of talk about 21-year-old you, but when did it click for you? And like, this is like, you think about the ESG space and in your role at CH Robinson, like when did you figure out like, hey, this is my jam. This is where I want to be. Like, what was that moment for you in your career?
I think, you know, going from nonprofit to business, like I said, it was, first of all, I didn't think that it was going to be here very long, but it was really being able to see the way that you have even greater opportunity to make impact through business. Like this work is going to happen one way or another. There's going to be movements
Hmm.
around the world. These companies are going to exist. And so instead of trying to, you're not going to stop that. It's a wonderful thing for our economy. So how can you just make sure that you're doing that in the right way? And then I think it was that component tied with the understanding of what supply chain is. So coming into Robinson, I will be honest, it was kind of just business. I didn't have any idea what the industry was, and I probably didn't even really understand what supply chain and logistics were. And so getting into Robinson and being able to truly understand what a global supply chain does and that impact it has was really eye-opening for me. And so I went from kind of this like roll my eyes, oh, I don't know, I got this job with logistics. I don't even know what that means, to being kind of the nerd that was cornering people at parties like, do you actually understand what supply chain is? So I might have been the only person that they were like, yeah, I do understand it. But it was, so I think, getting into Robinson and seeing those two pieces, it was hard not to be really excited about that.
All right. So Rachel, you're out having drinks at Martina and someone says, "What do you do for a living?" How would you describe it?
I mean, it depends on who I'm talking to. Sometimes I just say I do a lot of Teams meetings, but really the role that I play is kind of sits at that intersection of business and impact. So there's certainly a component of the work that's about doing the right thing, aligning with company
Hmm.
values and making a positive impact on our communities and our people and the world. But we are a for-profit company. And so we need to make sure that those things also make good business sense. So a lot of what I'm doing is figuring out like where do those things come together. And the good news again is you can do both. So with my role, that starts kind of at the highest level of figuring out where we're going to focus. There are so many areas that you can make an impact when it comes to sustainability or community. And so we really take that kind of in a twofold. And I would say this is where a lot of companies start, which is one, what is our business strategy? So like what are we impacting and where can we make an impact? And then what do our stakeholders care about? So I do a lot of conversations with stakeholders, and that's
Mm,
everything from investors to our customers and carriers, suppliers, community partners, our people. And then kind of marrying those two up and where those overlap is where we can focus in. The second piece is then taking that and embedding it into the work that we do so that it's not just sitting off on a shelf somewhere and, sustainability and community are kind of the, side things that we do for fun. It's how's that embedded into our operations. And then for Robinson, for those who don't know what CH Robinson does, we are a logistics service provider, but we're what we'd say is asset light or non-asset owning. So we don't have the trucks and ships and planes that we're moving things around on. So a lot of what we're doing then is figuring out how we embed that into how we're working with our 450,000 contract carriers and
mhm.
75,000 shipper customers. So that embedding is the second piece. And then the third piece is storytelling. So we hear from our stakeholders what they care about. We need to get that story back out on, what are we doing? What's the progress we're making? And kind of that continuous feedback loop. So I kind of play this convener role too of stakeholders and internal teams to make sure that that story gets told.
So cool. I love this intersection of business and impact because what you said about being 21, you're like, I'm going to go save the world and working for big corporations and feel like the way to do it. And in fact, you could actually have a bigger impact because just like you said, the movement of goods is going to be happening anyway. So how do you help shape that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this kind of comes back to all these stakeholders that you're also navigating and managing, right? So CH Robinson, massive portion of your work is obviously literally moving goods. And some of that can impact like scope 3 emissions. And so these are like all those carriers that you worked with. I think did you just say like 400,000? Is that
Yeah,
Wow.
450,000.
Jeez.
The
Okay.
latest number that we've gotten. Yes.
that's a lot. That's approximately a lot. How do you approach influencing that? I mean, cuz you want them to adopt, maybe some greener practices, but like they don't want to disrupt their business viability. What does that look like?
Right.
How do you even approach that?
Yeah, I mean, you're quickly hitting on probably the biggest thing in sustainability for not just Robinson, for most companies, is how to tackle the scope 3 emissions. So for I'm sure maybe most people know this, but in case you're listening and don't, scope 3 emissions are the emissions
Thank you
that
for
come
that.
from your value chain or your supply chain. So that's a big part of most companies' emissions. It can be, 75 to 90% for Robinson. It's more than 99% of our emissions
Wow.
come from
Mm,
our scope 3 just based on our business model. And I think that, to your point, that I think even just the way you ask the question is really smart because you can't come in and just say, like, now you all must do this. It really is
right.
about partnership, collaboration, and then being able to think about like where is there alignment and shared value on what we're trying to do here. So in the place that Robinson sits within all of this, there's kind of two big components to that. The first is around access to the data. And then the second is kind of as a bridge between those carriers and shippers. Starting with the data, we're lucky. I think getting access to data is a big part of what companies are trying to get when it comes to scope 3. We're lucky that we have a lot of that on system, but oftentimes what we're doing with our shippers is getting that information to them so they can understand what their transportation emissions look like. And I know this is a cliche, but that cliche of what gets measured gets managed is true. And so that is always the first piece is showing up to the table with the right information of where do your emissions sit? Because the next piece is going to be about, where do we find ways to reduce? And if you can't start with like putting those emissions next to cost and service, it's kind of hard to think about those
Yeah.
trade-offs.
Yeah.
I think we're in a good space in supply chain. You both know this. I'm sure many people out there, looking for efficiencies and driving out waste is kind of a
Mhm.
natural part of what we're doing anyway. And so that sustainability component is there's kind of this natural, like, great, we're going to be able to lower costs and lower emissions by reducing empty miles or optimizing our routes or whatever that may look like. So sometimes there's this really easy, you don't have to be doing any influence because this just makes sense for everyone. And then there's times where that doesn't happen, of course, and that's where you have to get into those kind of strategic trade-offs. So we really try to come at that, whether it's about, decisions that are being made within finding efficiencies or investing in EVs or alternative fuels. It starts with on the shipper side, the customer shipper side is understanding what their goals are and what do they want to get at and where can they make trade-offs and where are they willing to make investments. And then on the contract carrier side, which is really, I think, Katie, where that
Yeah.
question comes from the most is helping them more understand what the business case is. We would never
Mm,
ask a carrier to make an investment that doesn't make sense for their business. And for some carriers, especially smaller carriers, that's not an investment they can make right now.
right.
But if we can kind of aggregate the information on the shipper side, aggregate that demand, and bring that to the carriers so that as they're making their investments, it's not about like a trade-off, it really is better for their business. That's where we can have that influence. I think it's a lot of sharing of information and making sure that they have what they need to be able to make the right business decision. And again, going back to that alignment, when it works, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. Like with so many carriers, like how do you get everybody to care and like want
Mm,
just because you
Yeah,
got, that's a strategy or business. So thank you for because that was gonna be my question. Like, wow, that just seems like a lot of people to bring along with
yeah,
you on the journey. So this kind of goes to the storytelling you talked about. So you talked about the data, but you also have to have kind of a narrative, kind of this community relation. So how do you balance that need for we have to have the hard metrics, but you
right.
also have to have a really compelling story when you are communicating that, your progress to stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would say in this role, we certainly have to be thinking about that, and probably everyone is thinking about that in some way. And what we find, and I would say, I'm guessing many find is it's when those two come together, kind of that marriage of the true hard data with the narrative, that is the sweet spot because the data can
mm,
build the trust, and the narrative can kind of help build that understanding. And bringing those two together is where you can help drive action. On the sustainability side, the need for data has just continued to increase over past years. I think people are, stakeholders' expectations has moved from, I'm really glad you're telling us about that great recycling program that you have. What we really want to hear, though, is what is the data behind what you're doing, the impact that you're making, and how that's tying back to
Mm,
business results. And so I think everyone's been thinking about that. But the storytelling and anecdotes is like how that can come to life. And sometimes you have to think about the audience, right? I think that's a big thing too, is what is the action we're trying to drive? So sometimes it's enough to come to a customer and say, here's just some hard data on where you have, some like high emission spots and we can reduce that. Sometimes if you're trying to drive some action, maybe on the community side, for example, yes, we need data to show you're investing in this organization and here's the impact that it's making. It's this many
mm.
kids that are being impacted. But usually that storytelling is going to be what drives action. I want to hear about the individual that, had access to this new program because of the impact that I made. So sometimes you're leaning a little heavier on the storytelling and sometimes data depending on the audience.
Love that. So I want to switch a little bit then over to the social aspect of ESG
Yeah,
because you do some pretty cool work. Courtney, I was kidding around that one of our favorite things about this is like actually kind of researching the guest ahead of time. We're like,
sure.
look at this. I didn't even know they did this. So one of the things that you lead is working with St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. And so this is like really about the drivers themselves, right? And
Yeah,
we've heard tons, especially I think post COVID,
mhm,
about how that particular workforce, a lot of attrition after COVID, really long hours that they do away
yeah.
from families, all these things. Could you talk a little bit about like what this fund does and how it gets after like driver well-being?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's exactly right, that most of us kind of knew the importance of that role, especially if you're in this space, but gosh, COVID brought that to life in a way,
Mhm.
front and center for so many people. And the reality is, the drivers, truck drivers, especially in the US, are critical to the supply chain.
mm,
I think it's like 75% of total tonnage in freight is driven on a truck somewhere, especially for certain communities. Like 80% of communities rely solely on trucks to
Mhm.
get them the things they need. And so, yeah, that came up more in COVID. But you just talked to this, but the role is hard. It's hard to be on the road over and over again. So St. Christopher's was founded. Their founders kind of started this when they were looking at some of the health outcomes. So 70% of professional drivers suffer from chronic conditions leading to a life expectancy 16 years shorter than the average.
wow.
Wow.
Another issue is these kind of irregular hours and something I hadn't even thought of as truck parking issues, which is a whole nother conversation, but that can be a big barrier to accessing clinics. And then
Mm,
when they're off the road, if they're sick, that's just, they aren't making money. So St. Christopher's comes in and just does an incredible job of, first, if they do have to be on the road, how can they get financial assistance to help themselves and their families during that time? But they've also been really good about, and they're so close to the driver community and understanding what that looks like. So they do things like, can we do cancer screenings that they can mail in so they can do it from the road? Or what are well-being
Yeah.
programs that we can bring that make sense for them to do at a truck stop? Or, just understanding what that day-to-day life looks like that not everyone has. So yeah, they do a really incredible job, and we're lucky to be able to partner with them.
it's almost like some of the manufacturing, like the shift work,
Hmm.
numbers
Yeah.
Yeah.
around, like, your hours and switching and this I know Katie and I have seen some of the studies there, so it is I never thought about that for truck drivers, so, yeah, that's super interesting data. Okay, this is like so interesting. Like we do, we Google, we're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So we were reading about C.H. Robinson's partnership with Truckers Against Trafficking and the staggering number of professionals, over 1.4 million, who've been trained to kind of spot those crimes. So can you tell us more about how you empower drivers to really be the eyes and ears of the road and why it's vital for logistics companies to really take a stand on human rights issues?
Truckers Against Trafficking is another really fantastic organization. I'm so glad that we're able to talk about these groups. If you haven't heard of them, like Courtney and Katie said, look them up. Yeah,
We'll
that
have the
scales
links
in
in the show notes and everything too as
perfect,
well. Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, that scale is incredible, and I actually think they might even be up to 2.5 million that they've trained in all industries
Wow.
at this point. Drivers are really uniquely positioned as kind of that ears and eyes on the road because, unfortunately, trafficking needs movement to
Mm,
exist, and that's kind of where it thrives. And so they tend to be in the exact places where trafficking can occur. But that's a heavy topic. It's a hard
Hmm.
topic, and so it's one I think that's kind of easy to avoid because it's a little uncomfortable. So, with Truckers Against Trafficking, it not only shines a spotlight on the reality of what's out there, so just bringing that to the forefront and helping people understand that and have the conversations, but then also making those drivers feel empowered to act. Because even if you're seeing it and it might look a little uncomfortable, like,
mm,
I don't know, I'm not a law enforcement official, I'm not going to go take care of
mm,
this. So, making sure they feel like they can respond to that quickly. So we want to support the efforts that they have to get that out as much as possible. We have trainings for our own employees, and that's really critical. And as far as the why, I think if this one feels like it should be a pretty easy one, right? Like if this is happening, it's happening kind of in the space that you're in. If you can do the work to help a victim in any way, that seems like a pretty obvious. But we know that sometimes it has to go beyond that. But if it's tied to if you can't get on board with just this feels like the right thing, it's kind of this responsibility component, right? And
Right.
then of course, there's a business aspect of if you all of a sudden find out on one of your job sites or at your truck stop or whatever it is that this is occurring, there's a brand issue with that too.
Hmm.
So
mm.
it just is good business to make sure that you're thinking about those things early on.
So this is super random. Katie knows I'm obsessed with like crime junkies and
Yep.
Dateline and all that.
All right.
So
All right. We can talk about this too.
I was listening, but back to like what you see and like what you notice. And because someone was listening to Crime Junkies, she was going to a restroom in a gas station
Mm.
and there was like a special like lock at the top that and like something where like if women went in there you'd be locked in and you couldn't get out, and then like she reported it, and then of course everyone was like, we don't know what's happening, whatever. But yeah, like they actually like it was like a whole
Wow.
trafficking situation where like they would lock
For her.
I
Yeah.
know, and it's like we're but I don't because I was like, "Nah, look," but she was just something about it seemed off, and then
Yeah.
I guess when you go in the bathroom, there's, like, another door or something, and, like, then they kinda, like you're, like, go out the back or something crazy, and I was just thinking, like, I would never
Look
Right.
for
think
that.
at a random
No.
gas station, and then, of course, clearly, there were some workers there that were part of this whole situation,
Mm.
but it was, like, some kinda, like, mechanical like, they had, like, a remote behind the cashier, and they
My
would, like, lock you
gosh.
in, it was crazy.
But yeah, I mean, like you say though, you wouldn't even know to think of that.
Or to
And
look for that,
yeah, that
right?
exactly, exactly. Oh, it's terrifying.
So, yeah, so that is such a
Yeah.
good like, eyes and ears, like, you do have to train people
Yes.
to
And they're there and they can see it.
yeah.
So one of the things I appreciate about like, because we're going to talk about a couple more that you have going on. I love that they're still focused on like your industry
Mm,
and where you can have the most
Yeah, and impact.
impact. And I
Yeah.
think that's also really important is because there's so many things that you could go and work on in the world,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And I do appreciate that like each of these things, it's like, no, this is our space, this is our industry, these are our team members. And so this is
Right.
where we
I do
wanna
like that
focus.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's of course, again, there's always the like doing this for the right reasons because it's the right thing to do. But to have a healthy ecosystem, you need to make
Mhm.
sure that all of these things are thriving, and that's kind of the whole idea of all this work is what are kind of the long term factors that might not be financial, but that can drive that success
Yeah.
too. So
So, one of the other things, and I love this because Courtney and I are super passionate about getting more young people to join supply chain, and there's so many different ways to do that. You partner with the Next Generation in Trucking Association to get more young people into that part of our supply chain. And so, what do you find as you're out there and partnering? Anything that we could learn from? Because I think anybody, whether they work in logistics, procurement, manufacturing, trying to attract younger like Gen Z talent into this
yeah,
space, people want it. So, would curious to hear like where you've had some successes and what you're learning.
yeah. I mean, I think this would probably come as no surprise to people in supply chain because think about how many times you have the conversation with someone, or even when you ask people about kind of what was your aha moment, how often it's someone that said, like, I had no idea I was going to end up in supply chain. I kind of
Mm.
fell into it. One thing I will say is we are seeing an increase in the number of people who are going to school for supply chain. So I think the word is starting to get out a little bit more that there's truly like there's degrees in supply chain and you could go do this or logistics. This is a thing. And that was up almost 10% over since 2020. So that's great. And there are all these just really cool critical soft skills that you can apply if you get through school and don't know what you want to do. So come to supply chain. There's really cool ways to be able to use Gen Z being excited about being tech enabled, the global component to it, problem solving. I think the biggest thing we miss is just the awareness of it. So doing that, what Next Gen does really well is starting that early on, so that conversation can start in like middle school or high school, and people can think about that as a viable career option instead of just, "Oops, I fell into it." And so I think just helping people understand what it actually means to be in that, and the variety of roles that you can take, that you can be in tech and do logistics, or you can do so many different things, and that there's a true career path with that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think just getting the word out and kind of maybe not dispelling myths, but making it really clear of what it means to be in these careers and how much you can gain and learn from
Mhm.
it is huge. One other thing I will say about that, and I don't want to go too long on, I know I'm talking quite a bit on some of these, but
I like it.
it's really interesting. One of the things that one of our talent acquisition leaders shared with me is new grads right now are hyper aware of the role that AI is playing in the job market
Mm.
in the future. And so often they're getting questions like, what is your vision for AI and what is this going to mean? Like, am I going to take this entry level job and get cut in a year? Or is there truly a path for me to continue? And so being able to talk through that. And I think you had Michelle on recently talking about AI and how that's going to it's not going to be eliminating roles. It's going to be empowering roles and making those better, but making sure that they can see that vision of what am I actually going to be doing and what's my space going to be as it evolves is an interesting one.
We were just talking about that. Her episode actually just came out, Michelle McBride, and she was talking about brokers basically in
Yeah,
logistics and how AI will actually enable you to have like deeper, more meaningful strategic relationships
right,
because it's going to take care of like following up on all the orders and stuff like that. And yeah, that is really important. I think helping people see that bridge
right.
between how it can help you and free you up.
Yeah, you'll be supercharged instead of, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, yes,
Okay, Rachel, so as a leader in the kind of She Supply Chains community, we have to talk about your work with women in trucking. And
yes.
so this has been a very male-dominated industry. And so beyond just like hiring women in, what does like real inclusion look like for a woman behind the wheel versus 5 years ago?
Yeah, and I will say I'm not an expert on that piece. We don't have drivers at Robinson, but I think a lot of the same principles can be applied there, which is that idea of starting with embedding it in how the work gets done. So how are decisions being made? How are people progressing in their career? Inclusion can look like just on the basic level from an operations perspective, do people feel safe? Do they have access to the facilities that they need? Is workload distribution right? And I think people are starting to get more of those kind of basic like table stakes are there. Then that culture component of, at Robinson, we talk a lot about a speak up culture, people being able
Hmm.
to talk about, whether, that can apply in the driving community as well. But if you're seeing something that doesn't feel good, do I actually feel empowered to talk about this? Because we know
Yeah.
no one's perfect at that point. And then how are we making sure that people are getting the visibility to move up in their careers? They have those sponsors and continuing to progress. And ultimately, it's about removing barriers. I think, and that's really how we can get to the point where people can perform their best and can feel like they're bringing their really great ideas to the table. So that's kind of how Robinson's thinking about it, and Women in Trucking is a perfect example of how we can just scale that impact because they're doing the same things in the industry as a whole.
I
How do
think
you
that's so
Oh, go
cool.
ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Courtney,
I
go.
was gonna say, I would imagine, just thinking about myself, how do you address like the safety? Because I would feel like as a trucker, I don't know if you can answer this, but that would be a place where I would feel like uncomfortable, maybe more uncomfortable as a woman traveling
That's a
at
great question.
night.
I honestly don't have a great answer to that
Okay,
because
I
we,
just was
again,
curious.
just that we're not like
Yeah,
hiring the truckers, but Women in Trucking would have great answers to that. And we
okay. I
we
need
have
to
people
Google
on
that.
our board there, but no, I mean, it would be a really good conversation to have and think about that because there are just things that men, again, mostly usually a male dominated, that they probably haven't had to think about. And so I'm
Yeah.
sure
Mhm.
there are a lot of things that trucking companies have done and carriers have done to shift that as they get more
We should have
diverse.
them on the podcast too.
I
Yeah,
know. That's a great
that would be
Cool.
idea.
really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love
They'd
that.
they'd have so much more to say on that than that'd be great.
Okay. So as you take a step back and you look at, you have all of ESG, and we get a lot of questions. We want to do this whole series on sustainability, and we know sustainability is pretty broad. If you're in your own organization, how do you go about it so that you can actually help others who maybe are skeptics of it, like see the value in it? Because I can imagine that some people feel like, oh, that's nice, but is it
Yeah.
actually driving any value? Is it actually driving any resilience for your business? How do you help like others as they're doing this in their own organizations, maybe overcome those skeptics?
Yeah, you don't wanna have to be the Lorax that's just running around like, "I speak for the trees, please listen." I I think with this work, we always talk about this, or I say, like, we're always applying one of two lenses to the work that we're doing. It either should be about risk mitigation or capitalizing on a growth opportunity.
Mm,
And that can look very different for different companies depending on what industry you're in or what that looks like. Of course, thinking about supply chain, how much supply chain resilience and risk mitigation in that is huge. But if you're applying that lens and whatever you're doing can do one of those two things, you're usually in a good spot because there really is going to be value that you're driving there. And for a long time there was these conversations, and it's still happening, of like, well, do we call it ESG or is it sustainability? Or is it corporate social responsibility? And my thing is, whatever work we're doing, you should be able to take the title of it out and say we would still do this work no matter what because it is critical to the long-term health of our business.
ooh, I like that.
Mm, I like that too.
It's a good litmus test too,
Mhm.
right?
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so and then that makes it a lot easier when you're talking to internal stakeholders or whomever it is that you're trying to get this on. I mean, sometimes it is just about reporting and compliance, and that's an important piece for a company too to continue to operate legally. But if you're applying that lens, they can start to see the value that brings to their role and kind of that what's in it for me. Whether that's again about a risk mitigation or I'm working with this customer and they care about it a ton, and how can I know I can drive volume growth if we have these solutions for them. Then it goes from, hey, will you do this favor for me? I'll buy you a beer if you do this thing too. Oh my goodness, and they're seeking you out
Yeah.
and saying, help me be better at this because I know it's gonna make me better in my job.
Okay, Rachel, you shared your background. It's like so interesting from nonprofit to CH Robinson. And you even said you're like, I don't even know if I was really understood what supply chain was. So can you talk about how those early experiences in the nonprofit world like kind of have shaped how you show up as a leader in corporate? And what was the biggest learning curve as you transitioned?
Yeah, nonprofit, I think there was probably more commonality in the skills than differences, is what I realized pretty early on. Things like, and that might be just kind of to my role, but I think this is important in all corporate roles, is that ability to influence and align stakeholders. That's what you're doing a lot at a nonprofit, is
Yeah.
getting people on board with your mission and getting them to believe in what you're doing. So I'm still doing that all the time in my role. And the relationship component that was huge with my roles early on. How are you developing authentic relationships and then being able to leverage that? And so being able to apply that at a big company where I'm not going to know everything, but if I know someone that I can call to help me out with it, that's huge. I think the biggest gap was certainly the pace and scale of just a big company and logistics. I mean, logistics is a very just in time thing. So I'd be getting, gosh, all of a sudden everyone, they're IMing you and calling you and emailing you within 3 minutes because that's the pace that we're used to. So I had to adjust to that very quickly.
All right. So another leadership question for you. As you know, you've been with C.H. Robinson for a long time, but it does feel like a lot of people are job hopping a little bit more frequently. I feel like Courtney and I sometimes are really like, are we old? Because we've each worked for a couple of companies, but for very long, it
Very
feels
long
Yeah.
like pretty
periods of
long
time.
stretches of
But you're
time,
not
right?
old.
So, what is like a leadership lesson that maybe you learned really early on in that first role that you still carry with you today? And then the flip is, what's something you had to unlearn as you've moved up in your roles?
See, the early on, I don't know if it's a leadership, but something that kind of helped me, and I still see this to an extent, is operating in like the margins of your job description. So not overtaking other people's or stepping on toes and not taking on a bunch of work that isn't yours, but being able to kind of explore like we aren't doing this and I think that there is maybe a gap or a need is can we explore this and here's a solution for it has really helped me be able to kind of expand my scope and also solve problems for the business at the same time. So again, make sure you got your core job down really well, but what are some of those things that you're seeing come up over and over again and how can you influence that or make change is a big one
That's
that
some
I
good advice
try
because
doing.
everybody
I
would
think
want you
so
on your
too.
team to do those
Mhm.
things. Yeah.
And I
Again, I'm
do
not going to just take on all your busy work, but
Yep.
where
Yep.
are there problems?
think there is a generational evolution in that thinking because
That's probably fair.
I think when I started, my mom was like, "You just better do what they tell you and like get a paycheck." Like I didn't even think to, you know what I mean? And I was like, "I better
Yeah.
do whatever they ask. Like if it's extra, it's
Yes.
extra." And I think now Katie and I talk to young people and they're like, "I will do mine and maybe a little less or more." It's like I think I don't know. I get the feeling of playing outside of your lines is not as embraced, is what I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just my
Well,
feeling.
that's what I say. Looking at the margins, you don't want to go too
Yeah,
far with that, but
that's
it
true.
is like if you see a gap, speak up. That's going to help
Mhm.
a lot of people. Okay,
Right.
and there was a second part to that question that I wasn't
Okay.
getting into. Oh,
Anything you
yeah, it
had to
was
unlearn.
unlearn.
Yeah.
I mean, probably a lot of things. There's so much of that people talk about of like, well, you don't own every outcome now, and you have to rely on that team. So those are big ones. I think just being the last to speak and making sure that you're listening
Eh,
first and hearing what people have to say. I think it was eye-opening for me or something that it took me a while to realize as you have different titles, people listen differently or hear things differently, and I just
mhm.
didn't always see myself in that, I didn't feel like it had changed too much.
Yeah.
And so being sure that I was really cognizant of the impact of the words I was saying, because a lot of times I just kinda throw something out there like, "I don't know, maybe
Yes.
this, or that." And if unless I was really intentional about, like, I'm just throwing this out there as an idea or again, shutting up early on and listening first was huge. And then giving teams the ability to take risks and try things in new ways and making that a safe space so that you don't have to go, I would have done it this way instead of what you did.
Yeah.
Like there's so many ways to approach things, and oftentimes they're much better than I would have thought about. And so that's been really fun to watch. People flourish through that.
I love the listening one. I work on that all the time. But I also agree. I think as you go through your career and your titles change and you move up in organization, I don't know about you, Katie, but I almost like my title surpassed my ability to like not remember that I was, but I remember being at like a meeting and I was a plant manager and I was like, I was almost like, do you think we should do that? And they're like, well, you're the boss. Do you want to
Yeah.
do it? And I was like, oh yeah. Or your words mean so much more or different or so now with my team if I really want their opinion I'm like I'm not going to share mine first and
Right.
like
Mhm.
really allowing them to because I think it's very easy as a leader to jump in and I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things and if you want to get more from like really hear people's authentic point of view that was something that I think I even to this day sometimes forget because I feel like well I'm very approachable and people should feel
Right.
comfortable and like they shouldn't
Yes.
be scared to speak up and it's like yeah but
Yeah, but
the
yeah.
title does you have
Yeah.
a lot of control over people's careers and like a lot, so I think it's something as a leader that I have to remind myself of for sure.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it felt like, Courtney, is you're saying exactly what I was trying to say. That's exactly right. Um, yeah, and we have a fantastic CEO. He came on just about 3 years ago now, and I remember kind of one of the first meetings he had with our executive level leadership, and he said something like, "Hey, you are the leaders, right? Like
Mhm.
when people are pointing their fingers of, oh, why don't we do this, or what's happening here? Like that's you all." And it's not that I
You're like,
hadn't
you are
like
that
thought of
we.
that before, but for
You're the
some reason,
we,
all of a sudden, I was like,
the
"Oh yeah!"
they.
Like it was just, of course, that's such a good reminder, and it seems like it should be very obvious, but it's like, okay,
Someone
like
told
that
me
is a
you're the people they talk
responsibility.
about at dinner now,
Yeah,
and maybe
yeah,
Mhm.
it's like you're those
yeah.
people.
And that comes with really a big responsibility for
Yeah.
people, and so take that seriously. So, yeah,
Well, Rachel, this has been such a pleasure. It went by so fast.
You went by
Like
so fast.
we're
it's
Yes.
like
great
already
talking
done.
with you.
So this has been so lovely, and you guys are doing such amazing things in the community. So thank you
Mhm.
for
Thank you.
that.
I'm
That's
so
awesome.
glad. I appreciate that we got to spotlight those really great organizations and have conversations about. So thank you for finding those and pulling that out. And Courtney, we have to talk dinner places and crime
Yes.
podcasts.
Okay, I won't join in on your crime podcast, but I'll meet you for dinner.
Okay, I love it.
All right.
That
Thank you,
sounds great.
Rachel.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
so
Rachel. It was
much. Have
amazing.
a great rest of your day.